It's widely assumed that gaming is the ultimate power fantasy. By power fantasy, I'm referring to a work of fiction that is focused on making its consumer feel powerful, often by giving its main character an almost supernatural ability to overcome odds and change the fate of the world within. Video games are widely viewed as the ultimate power fantasy because unlike any other medium, they really allow us to be the main character, to get inside their skin, to actively mold the world with our actions. And so virtually every AAA game fits this mold. They revolve around a character with extreme luck, abilities, or competency who has an almost supernatural ability to command their environment, make an impact, and dispatch all but the greatest of foes with ease. And I'm not saying this is a bad idea. In a world where your average person has no real ability to impact or control their environment, who doesn't enjoy affecting the fate of a world while wielding the power of gods to slash through your enemies with the force of 1,000 colliding stars? I know I do. Ever since I first caught a Pokemon in Pearl, I felt the great release that comes from dominating digital life forms, which I should probably change as the first line of my CV. But in the last few years, I've had the feeling that this obsession with making us feel powerful has blinded the industry to the immersive potential of taking away some of that power, of making the player feel true struggle. And I want to dedicate this video to a game that more than any other demonstrates the sheer immersive potential of powerlessness. Kingdom Come Deliverance. D1 is one of those once-in-a-decade games that simultaneously goes against nearly all the common assumptions in the game industry and yet works better than 99% of other titles. The narrative starts off in a fairly conventional way. After a brief moment of calm before the storm, our hero Henry's village is sacked and family eliminated by a comically mustachioed villain, and he is left as one of the only survivors. Usually at this point you'd expect a conventional revenge narrative where this illiterate peasant gradually goes up the ranks to challenge this mustachioed bad guy in single combat after swatting away his minions one by one like a knife to warm butter, despite lacking the ability to spell revenge. Even a Souls game sticks to this broad sort of structure. It might offer challenging boss battles, but your average tarnish from the very beginning can fairly easily swat away most of the hordes of enemies that flock towards him in a post-apocalyptic frenzy. But not in KCD. Warhorse wants you to suffer, to feel like a man who has lost his village, future parents, and sense of purpose, left to fend for himself at the bottom of the pile in a hostile, unforgivable world, not a conquering hero on the up. At the beginning, the inhabitants of this medieval bohemian universe are much more likely to comment on how much you smell,
What's the matter, laddie? Need to shit?
than your non-existent skills, valor, or class. And if you're unfortunate enough to run into anyone with solid skills or a usable set of armor, you'll get whacked right in the face with a dose of blood-red reality. And a quick save isn't going to save you, because even the means to do that requires the money and resources you don't have. Now this might sound bad on paper. Conventional wisdom would tell you that starting the player off from the literal bottom and forcing them to go through a gauntlet of pain, even to fight the most basic enemy, is a bad idea. It could immediately put off a large proportion of the audience who are looking for an accessible form of entertainment.
We're going into the fade, aren't we?
And at first, I was kind of one of those people. I was not impressed by the first few hours of Kingdom Come Deliverance. The stiff dialogue, punishingly difficult combat, and infuriating lockpicking gave the whole thing a janky, unfinished feel, not helped by the constant pop in and out of bodies and glitches. But as I and many others were soon to find out, Warhorse, the creators of Kingdom Come Deliverance, knew something that your Ubisofts and EAs had largely forgotten, that to appreciate something has to be difficult to obtain, that suffering has a greater purpose. You see, in a regular AAA game, your Assassin's Creed,
It's a me, Mario!
your Far Cries, you're like a rich kid. Weaned so early on everything, nothing carries any value. Yes, you're constantly overstimulated with random sparkling lines, swarms of enemies and random numbers, but none of this stimulation feels truly gratifying because you almost take it for granted. Whereas in KCD, you're a bog standard brokey. You begin with nothing and are forced to struggle to the top. And so when you break the matrix and become Henry, slayer of humans and reader of books, it feels genuinely satisfying, disturbingly so, in a way that most power fantasies where you are that guy from the very beginning just can't compete with. I for one will never forget the first time I overcame a gang of humans. While strolling through the Bohemian countryside looking to separate a peasant from their coin, I was ambushed by a band of humans out of nowhere. Usually this would mean an early death or escape, but today was not one of those days. You see, after hours spent honing my skills and upgrading my armor, with the help of nearby corpses, I was ready to fight and win. My Henry was no longer a peasant of Skalitz, but its avenger, and avenge I did. After After a slightly awkward janky mess known as KCD Combat, I conquered my foes, and the satisfaction I felt as I looked upon their vessels gave me a sense of achievement that made up for every red screen and lost progress. Because despite having no discernible personality, these humans did just represent another random NPC to me, but a real foe. And while KCD is far from perfect, some features are genuinely irritating, and while the environments and short stories have a level of charm that carries the world, the overall narrative always felt a bit half-baked, as though the devs had a vision they couldn't quite afford, and they've largely admitted as such. But the fact that it succeeded nonetheless, and is loved so much to this day, that its sequel is more highly anticipated than any of the other big-budget, technically smooth, AAA games floating around from the likes of BioWare, Ubisoft, EA, you go down the list, says something. That gamers don't care if your game has AoE attacks with the most up-to-date lighting effect that look like they were conjured by Zeus himself, if on a basic level, the game doesn't feel satisfying, and our actions don't have real meaning. And I hope when KCD 2 comes out and blows the industry away, many devs will begin to understand this and move away from the simplistic, polished power fantasies of our era in favor of titles that go back to first principles and begin to ask the question, what do gamers really want? Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let me know if you think KCD 2 will be a turning point or if the AAA industry is too far gone.